With very high expectations for patch 2.4, what were the major balance changes going to be? What Shurima cards were going to be buffed and nerfed? And when will Twisted Fate Fizz finally get nerfed itself? We got none of that. One of the things we did get though was the stabilisation of the new Shurima expansion meta, and this top 10 list will show the highest win rate so far in this patch now that the meta is readjusting. So without further ado, let's dive in. This is Top 10 Decks Patch 2.4. This video has been done in collaboration with BomberTV. Please remember to like and subscribe and turn on the bell notifications too. So let's dive in. Scouts has been staple since the release of Bilgewater, defining what the aggro strategy to beat is. This deck has an incredible curve benefiting from all the great units coming from Demacia. It's basically mono Demacia featuring 3 copies of Misfortune. In patch 1.12, the playstyle of this deck has not changed much, but seems to have success due to mid-range doing well in the current meta. On the mulligan, you always want to keep Misfortune and Quinn, as those are key cards in the deck, but it's also important to have your 1-drops, Fleet Feather Tracker in particular, so you can also swap your Quinn for a Lucian if you feel Lucian suits your playstyle better, so a little bit of flexibility here. You want to level up Misfortune as fast as possible, which is always great if you want to attack with your scouts. So don't worry about killing your scouts, because basically you just need to get those attack rounds in as much as possible. You also have a lot of ways to generate value thanks to your tricks. Rangers resolve to counter AoEs and get value trades on wide blocks. And you've also got single combat to remove their key cards, often getting a value trade by doing that. There's also Riposte as a way to shield from removal and deal bonus damage. And finally back to back, which is amazing if casted on your scout units, as they benefit from double the amount for that. Obviously they're getting 2 attacks, so double the bonus. This is Zoe Lee Sin Targon and features cards from Targon and Iona. It's a very spell heavy deck featuring 23 spells in total. Has a lot of low cost cards too, with 23 costing 2 or less mana. The deck is fairly expensive with 6 epic cards. This deck is the finest example of how a combo deck can work. You want to survive against aggro decks, and you want to get your combo out as fast as possible against control decks before they get to their late game. The combo here is to level up Lee Sin, cast Zenith Blade on his ability so it hits the Nexus and removes the blocker, and then with the Overwhelm from Zenith Blade, Lee Sin will actually hit the Nexus, making it an unblockable double attack, which seems broken, and to be honest it probably is. You would think that this is really simple and easy to achieve. In theory it is if you can survive long enough. For this we have cards like Sparklefly and Eye of the Dragon. Sparklefly and Eye of the Dragon's Draglings both have lifesteal, so you'll consistently summon Draglings with this as the deck has so many low cost spells. Buff your lifesteal cards up with spells like Pale Cascade and Bastion to make their damage bigger, meaning your lifesteal heal is also bigger as a result. Next, we want to level up Lee Sin, and to do this we have to cast cheap spells, and cards which generate those cheap spells, for example Mentor of the Stones, who can create gems, or Pale Cascade once again, as this is just 2 mana. Then occasionally you may have removal spells of challenger cards trying to take out your Lee Sin, and aside from his obviously natural barrier you can get for his ability, you can also cast protections like Deny or Bastion once again. With the introduction of Zoe, the Lee Sin Targon archetype got some changes, but essentially plays out the same way. Zoe can generate super cool star charts which contributes to Lee Sin leveling up, so it's not really key to the theme of the deck, so she basically acts as a glorified follower. So overall this is a very skill based deck, and in the right hands can be absolutely devastating. This is Azir Lucian and it features cards from Demacia and Shurima. I've classed this deck as a mid-range even though it's quite aggressive and also has some combo potential. The average cost in the deck is more weighted towards low cost, with 16 cards costing 2 mana and 9 cards costing 1 mana. It's fairly budget with only 2 epic cards. This deck has a lot of things going on. The main idea is to take advantage of the when allies attack effect on both Azir and the Emperor's Dais to summon lots of sand soldiers and overwhelm your opponent with basically quite wide boards. As you can see on the screen, both cards have the effect to summon sand soldiers, so you can quickly sense the theme here. To achieve this pretty straightforward synergy, you can do it with scouts such as Grizzled Ranger. As a reminder for all new players, all your scout units can attack twice as long as your first attack is exclusively with scout only cards. Another attack-minded card is obviously Lucian, which has the rally effect that when a unit dies for the first time each round, rally means you gain an attack counter once again, and it obviously has this on his leveled up card. Lucian will almost always level up as you're going to summon lots of ephemeral sand soldiers, which almost always guarantee an additional attack thanks to Lucian. Ephemeral means a unit dies at the end of the round on its first strike, so a very nice little combo here. Another card which is very strong here is the Inspiring Marshal, which can have a win condition on his own. He basically doubles the damage dealt by every sand soldier, which can you imagine is pretty strong considering how many you're going to summon depending on how many times you attack. So overall this is a very aggressive deck with some nice combo potentials, meant for competitive players which basically like skill based decks. A lot of players were super excited about the Emperor's deck on Azir at level 3, many others were excited about Azir and Ephemerals. The latter won the race of which deck would be the most competitive in the end, and BomberTV has a more in-depth analysis on his deck on his channel, so please check it out in the card above. This is Azir Ephemerals, and it features cards primarily from Shadow Isles, with some cards also from Shurima. It's a standard aggro mana costed deck with 20 cards costing 3 or less mana. It's actually a little bit expensive with 5 epic cards in total. The core idea behind this deck is to attack with lots of ephemeral cards and then hit your opponent with a leveled up Hecarim on turn 6, often resulting in you winning the game. This deck has so many ways of generating ephemeral cards, so you're not going to struggle to get a lot of them on the field. And a leveled up Hecarim gains the effect of granting all ephemeral cards 3 extra damage when he levels up when they attack, so you're going to have a big combo to finish. To achieve this, one of our key cards is Shark Chariot, constantly being resummoned attacking, and thus advancing the level of Hecarim even further. Hecarim obviously levels up when you attack with 7 ephemeral cards, which is going to be super easy in this deck. Another one of your key cards is Azir, always guaranteeing an ephemeral attacking champion in the form of sand soldiers. This works well with Shark Chariot, as he obviously arrives when you have an ephemeral card attacking, so you're going to be having a sand soldier and Shark Chariot most turns in an ideal world. Another very important card is Soul Shepherd. Not only does it give you more attack, putting more pressure on your opponent, but actually the most important thing is the health buff, meaning that your opponent can't simply just ping a small AoE card to counter all your weak ephemeral cards, and that's quite a big deal in this deck. Later on, finish the game with Hecarim. If your opponent is too resilient, you also have the Harrowing to put an end to the game. The Harrowing revives the strongest 6 allies that died this game and grants them ephemeral, meaning they will benefit from your ephemeral buffs cards in this deck too. So overall this is a very aggressive deck, almost totally kind of ignoring any form of defense, which obviously constantly you're going to be racing against your opponent to finish the game as quickly as possible. To counter Azir Ephemerals, you just play a bunch of AoEs like Avalanche or Ice Shard, and you should have a pretty easy time, and this is why decks play Soul Shepherd to protect the cards which would otherwise die really easily. So ephemeral cards typically have super low health, and cards like this just wipe them out. This is Discard Aggro, a deck you definitely recognise from previous deck lists. It features cards from Piltover and Zorn and Noxus, and features 3 different champions, Teemo, Draven and Jinx. You can include 2 or any 3 of the combination here. The average mana cost is very low, with 23 cards costing 2 or less and 14 costing 1 or less. The most expensive card in the deck is Augmented Experimenter. The deck plan is quite simple. Against slow decks, try to finish your opponent as early as possible before they get their endgame. Against aggro or mid-range decks, you can try and win the race against them to see who can finish faster, or you can go for the value approach granted by the leveled up Jinx. Of course, you need to first draw her and then level her up. As the name suggests, the deck is all around discarding, so cards which can be both discard and draw are very desirable, such as Zornite Urchin and Rummage. The deck has a lot of options, smart plays, and therefore is a very skill based deck, First of all, it's always important to know when to discard a card and what ones you should be discarding altogether. For example, there are obvious discard targets such as Flame Chompers, Jury Rig and Vision, and these are pretty straightforward what to discard. As for the when to discard a card, Jury Rig can be useful to summon a blocker or attack at burst speed, either punishing their open attack or to go in for the kill. The same goes for discarding Flame Chompers at burst speed, although it is much more useful to remove a big blocker so that your other units can basically go in and do what they need to do. Vision should be used to go in for the kill and take your opponent off guard, or to complete trades. This can almost be a win condition in some situations. With the new addition of survival skills, discard aggro seems to be getting a lot of love from Riot at the moment, and continues to be one of the best spots in the meta. Even if this list doesn't run survival skills, I would still suggest experimenting with it. Azir Draven is a deck featuring cards from Piltover and Zorn and Noxus. It features a very balanced mix of spells and followers and has a very low average mana cost, with all but 2 copies of Captain Farron costing 4 or less mana. It's relatively expensive, featuring 5 epic cards. The core idea of this deck is to get your Captain Farron out as fast as possible and finish the game with him. To accomplish this goal, you need to do 3 things: draw him, survive, and deal a little bit of damage before he comes onto the board. To accomplish the draw part, we have the so-called discard package. Discard to draw cards like Sump Dredger and Rummage are fantastic draw tools, which unfortunately would not really increase your hand size, but basically quickly cycle through your deck faster to get the cards you need. That's where Draven, Chump Wump and Ballistic Bot come in. By generating cards which are not as very useful, you can use them as basically easy discard targets and replace them with more valuable cards. To survive, you have lots and lots of control tools, like Mystic Shot and Thermogenic Beam. Use these to take out your opponent's key cards. On top of that, all the units from the discard package are pretty good blockers too. Ezreal can be involved in your game plan, which also helps on the control side, giving you additional Mystic Shots. Finish off by summoning Captain Farron and using his Overwhelm and the decimates he generates to quickly finish off your opponent. Captain Farron that appears in this deck got nerfed, and this deck is much more noticeable than all the others that he was basically running. So this deck is still super consistent though, which is why it's still pretty high on this list, but not the number 1 spot. Captain Farron. Azir Draven continues to be very solid, even though it's decreasing in viability, especially after that much deserved nerf to Captain Farron. Here is another deck you'll definitely recognise. It's Pirate Aggro, featuring cards from Noxus and Bilgewater. It's an aggro deck with a very mixed mana cost, with several cards costing all the different mana costs from 1 to 5. It's quite an expensive deck to build, with 8 epic cards in total. The power cards here are Misfortune and Gangplank. Even if Misfortune will struggle to level up, she's here just a consistent way basically to level up Gangplank and make your board much more threatening on your attacking turns. Gangplank can then end the game against wide boards, and therefore making aggro mirror matches quite easy with this deck. This deck wants to develop a board early on, and you can do this with a very quick start to the game with burn cards such as Lieben Saboteur and Jagged Butcher. Afterwards, it has a lot of ways to end the game with burn, with units like Imperial Demolitionist or Jack the Winner. Jack the Winner creates a Sleep with the Fishes each round, which deals 2 to an ally to deal 2 to the opposing Nexus. You also have Zap Spray Fin, which will be able to draw you a Noxin for 4, always, as this is your only spell card with 3 or less mana, and this is obviously a fantastic card in this deck which can be very aggressive. If you reach late game, you can quickly close the game with Captain Farron and Decimate. Using the Overwhelm on Captain Farron and the pure damage from Decimate will quickly reduce your opposing Nexus to 0. So overall, this is a pretty solid deck and a very fast one too, so if you want to rank up quickly, this is definitely an option I recommend. Pirate Aggro receives a nerf to Captain Farron, but some deck lists of this Pirate Aggro archetype don't even include him. So even if they do, you're going to have such a strong aggressive opener with 2 Decimates that it's probably going to be more than enough for this deck, so I'd say it's basically unchanged. Pirate Aggro is obviously an aggro aggressive deck, and when it's so early in an expansion, aggro decks like this one are always going to perform quite well, preying down on players experimenting with new unrefined strategies, so that's why loads of aggro decks are on this list. Fiora Shen is primarily a Demacia deck which also features 13 cards from Iona. It's a mid-range deck which takes advantage of two keywords, Barrier and Challenger. So in other words, revolves around very simple combat where you're doing favourable fights and protecting your units. It's a fairly expensive deck featuring 5 epic cards. Value and flexibility are the keywords with this deck. Take as many value trades as possible, which is very easy with challenges such as Screeching Dragon and Fiora. Screeching Dragon is a great common card from the last expansion, and Fiora can simply act as a cheap free power challenger card here. Try to give them barrier with cards like Shen and Riposte. Shen gives a supported ally barrier this round, and Riposte gives an ally free damage and barrier this round as well. There are also lots of tricks to take advantage and punish your opponent with, like single combat and sharp sight. Note they both involve combat to kind of fit in theme with the deck. Single combat obviously allows a favourable fight, and sharp sight makes sure you're buffed enough to kill over a key unit or survive a key fight. If value doesn't win you the game, you always have the Fiora win condition, which is easily achievable with all the protection barrier cards you have in this deck, including Iona cards such as Spirit's Refuge, so overall a very solid deck fitting most playstyles and players. This is Twisted Fate Aphelios, and it's a deck that first appeared in patch 2.1. Features cards from Targon and Bilgewater and has a good mix of followers and spells. It's actually a very low costing deck with a very low average mana cost, with all but 6 cards costing 4 or less mana. It's a fairly expensive deck actually, with 7 epic cards in total. This deck doesn't really actually have an overall synergy or theme in which all the cards fit in. Instead, the common factor here is value. We're talking about tons and tons of value throughout the deck. Aphelios creates infinite amounts of value in theory, providing you with all the tools you need, be it removal, a stabilisation tool, a finisher, a way to develop, or an advantage in combat via any of his moon weapons. It simply goes on and on. Twisted Fate incentivizes you to draw a card, therefore generating value. If he levels up, the game is basically over. His blue card allows you to draw a card and refills 1 spell mana. When he levels up, he can play up to 3 Destiny cards a turn, which is also absolutely insane value. The rest of the cards in the deck are basically there to answer the common threats that you see in the meta, and all to synergise with the champions. For example, Octopus can be summoned by the new moon weapon, Crescendum, which summons a 2 mana cost follower from your deck. As this is the only 2 cost mana follower in the deck, it will always be summoned. Pick a card can be activated to level up Twisted Fate more consistently. With Pick a Card, you place a card from your hand into the deck, then draw 3 fleeting cards next turn. Twisted Fate levels up when you draw 8 cards, so this can be achieved super quick. Overall, this deck feels great to play and fits in with players who like to always have the answers to any problem their opponent faces with them. With the introduction of Aphelios, many players have tried to build successful decks with him, and I guess this deck is the best version of those experimentations that all the players have been trying in the meta. Bomber has a more in-depth guide about this deck on his channel, and you can find that in the card above or the pinned comment below. We're seeing a rise in popularity of this deck. It's being popularised by some big streamers. As a result, loads of new players are actually trying it out as a result of seeing it. And I feel this is probably diluting the actual win rate of the deck, which is most likely a lot higher at the kind of masters level and that kind of tier. So this deck is a lot more meta than it suggests. This is Twisted Fate Fizz Elusive and features cards primarily from Piltover and Zorn, even though the 2 main champions are from Bilgewater. It's actually quite an expensive deck with 7 epic cards in total on top of the 6 champions. It's very spell heavy with 25 in total and only 9 follower cards. The deck has a very strong ramp to mid game with lots of cards costing 0 to 4 mana. The 2 main ideas with this deck is level up Twisted Fate and kill with elusives. It's as simple as that. When Twisted Fate is leveled up each round, the first 3 cards you play, anytime you hit a card, he activates a destiny card, which I'll go into shortly about what these can do. To accomplish the first goal of levelling up Twisted Fate, you have plenty of drawing tools such as Rummage and Pick a Card. Rummage discards 2 to draw 2, and Pick a Card places a card from your hand into your deck to draw 3 cards in the next round, which are all going to have fleeting. All this drawing will level up Twisted Fate quick. After Twisted Fate levels up, the amount of value he generates is absolutely insane, even if he survives just a single round. The red card from Twisted Fate will crush aggro strategies with the wide damage it does to all your opponent's units, which are typically going to have little health if they're aggressive. Yellow card can set back the tempo of your opponent on the turn they go in for their finishes. Imagine how triggering it's going to be when you deal 2 damage and stun their boss card just as they're about to win. Blue card can generate more value and it's useful in a control matchup. Now imagine casting all 3 of them in the same round, all 3 of Twisted Fate's cards, which can easily be done with the amount of low cost burst spells that this deck runs. To finish and kill, we do this with elusives, and we mainly have Fizz and the hidden gem Wiggly Burblefish. If you start off with a Fizz, then draw on turn 2 into Suit Up, this can be devastating. Suit Up costs 2 less when drawn and sets a card's stats to 4/4. It will also activate Fizz's effect, so he's untargetable and elusive. The 4/4 stat line is basically unremovable in the early games and can only be answered with the single target removals like Vengeance or multiple removals, giving you advantage on the value and baiting out removals for safer Twisted Fate later on, so he can obviously be generating the value of his cards. Wiggly Burblefish is also the best target for Imperative Improvement to push for more elusive damage while also protecting the generated copies from pings. This spell simply creates a copy of Wiggly Burblefish with the additional 1/1 stats. Twisted Fate Fizz was the best deck in the past meta and is now falling through in terms of viability, but still holds up the ground, so we'll see if she continues to decline or will rise back to the top. To counter Twisted Fate's Fizz elusive, you play a bunch of AoEs like Avalanche or Ice Shard, and you should have a pretty easy time. The key cards in this deck actually have very low health, so you can quickly take them out with spells like this to stop your opponent in their tracks. I know what you guys are thinking, what a boring list. On patch 2.3 we had so many fun new Shurima decks and a great chance to talk to you all about the wonderful kind of new things that this expansion is going to bring. We had barely any of that in this list. This video had a few new decks, but basically only a couple of Azir ones. Let's hope patch 2.5 brings some much needed balance changes to help spice up Legends of Runeterra. We were so excited that the expansion came here, and I feel some balance changes are what was really needed to really excite the game. What do you think is the best new deck in Shurima expansion so far? I would love to hear in the comments. Up next is Best Meta Decks Patch 2.4, taking a look at the decks currently dominating the meta. The data presented here is analysed by BomberTV using MOBA analytics. He's a Masters tier player with a background in game theory and game design. He took the most winning archetypes into Master tier, excluding ones with small play rates, analysed their key properties on why they are so strong. Link to his channel is in the pinned comment and in the card above. I've recently set up an Instagram account, @LoreGuides, and I'll be doing a giveaway shortly. Please follow this account for see posts about new videos, and will be in a chance of winning this giveaway. Please remember to like and subscribe, and turn on bell notifications too. See you next time, guys.